In a small, cozy town where everyone knew everyone, lived a young couple, Elena and Dmitri. They had just moved into a new house on a quiet street, where tall, shady trees grew everywhere, and the wind always whispered its secrets. At first, everything was going well, but soon they began to notice strange things happening around them. Their new neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Green, seemed very unusual. Mr. Green always wore the same gray coat, even in warm weather, and Mrs. Green often stood at the window, watching everyone who passed by. The Greens' house looked rather gloomy, as if time had bypassed it. One evening, as the sun was already setting over the horizon, Elena noticed Mr. Green carrying a heavy bag to his car. The sight of the bag and the way he carried it caused her strange unease. She told Dmitri about it, and he decided they should keep an eye on them. A week passed, and Elena and Dmitri began to notice more and more strange events. Every night in the Greens' house, lights would flicker on, and strange sounds resembling whispers could be heard. One night, they even saw Mr. Green burying something in the garden under the cover of darkness. Their curiosity reached its peak, and they decided to investigate. On a dark and chilly evening, when not a soul was visible, they approached the Greens' house and hid behind the fence. Their attention was drawn to a small door leading into the basement, from which odd noises were emanating. The door was slightly ajar, with light seeping outwards in a faint beam. As they cautiously moved closer to the door, the air became thick with the smell of dead wood and mold. Suddenly, the door swung open, revealing Mr. Green standing there with a shovel in his hands. His eyes burned with a mad fire as he stared at them silently. "What are you doing here?" he asked quietly, his voice sounding like a hoarse whisper. Elena, trying to control the tremble in her voice, replied, We just wanted to know what was happening here." Mr. Green smiled, but it was not a smile of joy, but something much more sinister. "You want to know the truth?" he asked, and they nodded in response. "Fine, follow me." He led them into the basement, where they saw old, cracked walls and shelves filled with jars of formalin, containing strange objects. In the corner of the basement stood a large wooden chest. Mr. Green approached it and opened the lid. Inside were old photographs of various people. "These are my experiments," he said. "I study human nature and the limits of endurance." Elena and Dmitri stood in shock. "You are a scientist?" Dmitri whispered. "Yes, but not the kind you think," Mr. Green replied. "My experiments are forbidden by law, but they provide valuable knowledge." Elena felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She realized they were trapped, and it would be difficult to escape. They hurriedly left the house, trying not to look back. Upon returning home, they couldn't sleep for a long time, discussing what to do next. But one thing was clear, their neighbors were not just strange, they were dangerous. All the following week, Elena and Dmitri tried to avoid encountering the Greens. But one evening, when they returned home, they found a small package on the doorstep. Inside was a note, "Hope you enjoyed our acquaintance. Come again." The blood froze in their veins. They knew they were now under constant watch, and their lives would never be the same again. Time passed, and they continued living in constant fear, waiting for something terrible to happen. But no one appeared, and after a few months, Elena and Dmitri decided to move. They left that house and that town, hoping never to meet such strange and dangerous neighbors again. But even years later, in moments of silence and tranquility, they recalled that eerie house and their neighbors, and cold horror gripped their hearts again. Several years passed since Elena and Dmitri left the eerie house on Elm Street. They settled in a new city, far from the terrifying memories of the Greens. Life seemed to improve, and the nightmares of the past gradually faded away. However, one day, after receiving a letter with no return address, they felt the cold fear gripping their hearts again. Inside the envelope was an old photograph of their former house with the caption, "We are always watching." Dmitri felt a shiver run down his spine. "It's them again, Elena," he said, showing his wife the photograph. "They found us." Elena squeezed his hand, trying to calm him and herself. "We can't live in fear again," she said. "We must find out what's happening and put an end to this once and for all." They decided to return to Elm Street to find out what really happened that fateful night. The road to the old house was eerily familiar, and the memories of the past flooded back with new force. When they arrived at the house, they noticed it was empty and abandoned. The doors and windows were boarded up, and it seemed that no one had visited it for many years. But the strange feeling of being watched did not leave them. They cautiously entered the house and headed to the basement where they once met Mr. Green. In the corner of the basement stood the wooden chest, now covered with a layer of dust. Mitri approached it and opened the lid, but inside were no photographs or journals. Instead, there was an old, tattered book. They opened the book and began to read. The pages described stories of a mystical society that conducted strange rituals and collected human souls. All members of this society had unique abilities and maintained contact with the world of the dead. The Greens were part of this society, Elena whispered, realizing the truth. They used our fear to fuel their power. Suddenly, the house shook, and Mr. and Mrs. Green appeared from the shadows. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and their faces were covered with sinister smiles. "You can never escape from us, Mrs. Green said. We will always be watching." Elena and Mitri realized that their only hope was to destroy the book that connected the Greens to this world. They threw the book into the fire that suddenly flared up in the fireplace. The Greens tried to stop them but failed. As if obeying some magic, the house began to collapse. The Greens disappeared in a cloud of smoke, and Elena and Mitri rushed to escape. The house crumbled behind them, leaving only a pile of rubble. At that moment, they realized they were free from the nightmarish curse. They left, leaving behind all the memories of the eerie house and their strange neighbors, hoping never to encounter such evil again. After the destruction of the house on Elm Street, Elena and Mitri felt relief and hope for a normal life. However, the eerie feeling that they had not yet been released continued to haunt their souls. Shortly after moving to the new city, they discovered that they had not escaped their fear. One evening, while enjoying a quiet dinner, the phone rang. Elena picked up the receiver and heard a familiar whisper. "You can't run from us. We are always here." Horrified, Elena dropped the phone and looked at Mitri, who understood everything as well. They realized that the Greens had somehow found them again, determined not to give up and to deal with this evil once and for all. Elena and Mitri went to the local librarian, known for his knowledge of occult sciences. He told them that the society, of which the Greens were a part, used an artifact to communicate with the world of the dead. The artifact was lost in the ruins of the house on Elm Street, and if it were not destroyed, the evil forces would continue to haunt them. The librarian also informed them that the artifact could be destroyed only by taking it to a sacred place, an ancient altar hidden in the nearby forest. Elena and Mitri decided to embark on a dangerous journey to free themselves from the curse once and for all. On a dark, starless night, they set off into the forest, following the librarian's directions. The path was long and fraught with dangers, but they did not lose hope. Finally, they reached the sacred place, where they found the altar surrounded by ancient runes. When they placed the artifact on the altar and recited the incantation, the air around them trembled, and light burst forth from the artifact, illuminating the entire forest. It seemed as if the shadows themselves were being destroyed by this light. In time, the light faded, and a deep silence settled. Elena and Mitri realized that the evil had finally been defeated. They returned home, feeling that they could now start a new life without fear and anxiety. Years passed, and they became known in the city as those who freed it from an ancient curse. Life finally blossomed with vibrant colors again, and the nightmares of the Greens were left far behind.